We're almost overrun. I mean, we have a lot of children in hospitals now. So even though, relatively speaking, compared to an adult, they do not get as seriously ill, we have lost more children from SARS-CoV-2 than we ever lose for influenza.
That's not true. That's not true at all. Listen to this quote, we've lost more children from COVID than we ever lose from the flu, influenza. We've lost more kids from COVID than we ever lose from the flu. No. Now listen, you may not think this matters. Oh, so you're nitpicking or whatever. But when Lord Fauci, like the top guy who we're supposed to be following and worshiping or whatever, gets something this wrong, I mean, what do you want me to do? Just like let it slide? Like, whatever. Like, no, you have to call that out. This is a major credibility issue. Okay, so here's the deal. CDC numbers. I'm only using CDC numbers. 439 pediatric deaths from COVID. Excuse me, with COVID. Ages 0 to 17, 439 deaths with COVID. Over the last 20 months. You see that little line right there? Over the last 20 months, from the beginning of the pandemic. Now, let's talk about this number 439. How many of those kids were already sick, one way or the other? How many of those kids were healthy? Almost none were healthy. But let me tell you this. Multiple studies. We have multiple studies now that talk about the dying with COVID as opposed to from COVID. UC San Francisco did a study of kids in hospitals in California. And they said there's no reason to believe it's any different across the country. And they say that the hospitalization and death rate from kids from COVID is overcounted by 40%. A study from Stanford showed that in one hospital, their hospital, 39% of pediatric COVID patients had no symptoms at all. But they're labeled as COVID patients. But they don't even have symptoms. They don't even know they have COVID. They have no symptoms. And then another 30% had mild or moderate symptoms that they weren't there for COVID. That's 69% of people in this one hospital that are labeled as pediatric COVID patients either don't even know they have it or like whatever, it's like mild. Like that's not why they're there. Now, just in case you think I'm making this up, here's the headline. This is from the Stanford Med School website. It says COVID-19 hospitalizations among children likely overcounted. Researchers find not likely is. Another study of VA hospitals. This is with adults, but same thing with kids. No reason to think it's any different. They looked at 50,000 patients at VA hospitals across the country and labeled as COVID. 48% of them were asymptomatic or mild or moderate. Right? So they weren't there because of COVID. They were there with COVID, which inflates the number of hospitalizations, obviously, and surely inflates the numbers of deaths as well. So that 439 number, we'll go with it. We'll work with it. We'll use it. But know that that is with COVID, not necessarily dead from COVID. That is a very, very inflated number. Okay, so you got two asterisks on that number. 439 kids dead from COVID, or with COVID. That's with COVID and over 20 months, almost 2 years. Now, kids and the flu, well, it's the opposite. If we counted every kid who died for any reason whatsoever, but if they happen to have the flu at the moment, then the numbers would be out of control. But the CDC doesn't count the flu that way, nor should they, right? So when the CDC counts deaths from the flu, it is just from the flu. Now, the 2012 flu season, there were 1,161 deaths from the flu. These were specifically flu deaths. And that's over 12 months. It's a flu season, right? It's 1 year, not 20 months. That number is more. 1,161 is more than 430 or whatever it was, right? Now, that's a bad flu year. You see here, these are all the different flu seasons and the number of kids 0 to 18 who have died. All right, it ranges, right? I mean, what do you see when you look at that? I see, 130, that's a low one. I see 200, 300. But then you see a couple 400, 600s. There's an 800. There's that bad one, 1,000, right? So it's kind of ranges. The swine flu of 2009, before that one, killed 1,153 kids. 1,153, way more than COVID. And I never heard a peep about the swine flu in kids, let alone not letting kids eat lunch together or forcing them to wear masks outside on the playground. Did you ever hear anything about the swine flu in kids? And there are no precautions. So here's the short of it. COVID deaths from kids are overcounted. Flu deaths are, if anything, undercounted. And still then, even then, Fauci said we have lost more children from COVID than we ever lose from influenza. Ever. So why would he tell a white lie? Why would he over-exaggerate the threat of COVID in kids? Well, because the FDA the other day came out and said that kids from the ages of 9 to 11 can take the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, which means it's going to be mandated. And they're getting ready to do this for 6-month-olds as well. They're going to mandate it on 6-month-olds. Now the question is, well, who would do this? Who would vaccinate a 5-year-old? Or who would vaccinate a 6-month-old? That's crazy. So how does he get people to do it? Well, he scares them. He scares you. How can you do that? Well, you just inflate the threat of COVID on kids. There's no threat to kids about COVID. But Fauci is a fearmonger. A fearmonger is someone who deliberately spreads fear among people.
Wow, that was deep and insightful. I want more of that. Like, subscribe, get more.